Hello and welcome to Stacy's Infinity Podcast Season 2. I'm your host, Dr. Stacy Cisneros, and this is a podcast where we make the energetic practical. And so today I'm excited to introduce Dr. Rashmi Schramm. Dr. Rashmi Schramm is a board-certified family physician, certified somatic-based coach, and meditation teacher. She helps busy women tap into their own inner peace and power so they can enjoy living more energetic and fulfilling lives. She's the host of the Inner Peace and Power podcast, available on all major platforms. So welcome, Dr. Rajmi, to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stacy. It's an honor to be here.
Dr. Rajmi, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your journey and where was that specific moment when we realized that healing was just more than what we were taught in medical school, where we have to include the nervous system, our bodies, and our consciousness?
Oh man, what a great question. So I was born in India and I actually lived there with a large extended family until I was 12, and we immigrated here into a tiny coal mining town in Southwest Virginia. But my first 12 years, I got to live with a large extended family, as I mentioned, and it was run by the matriarch, my grandmother, who I was very close with, and she was known to have developed spiritually, and she was a very well-known teacher. She was a very well-known student of another kind of yogi, if you will. And so a lot of Ayurveda yogic practices were all very commonplace, although maybe we weren't calling them that per se within my larger family structure. And so right off the bat, I think there was some part of me that understood about energy and energy work and spirituality, not necessarily as religiosity, but as a practice that I will be doing for my entire life. And I had had certain experiences just as a child where we can certainly call them woo, but they were there. And then in the process of assimilation, sixth grade, I mean, none of that could possibly survive. And so had to abandon really all of that. And through college, I started to understand, and even when I was pre-med, I was deeply drawn into mind, body, spiritual experiences, mind, body, spiritual healing, all of that stuff. And then I got into med school and all of that again with assimilation was gone. Same thing, kept up with it during residency. And then it was truly when I started to feel helpless with my own patients as an attending. It was, just absolutely bombarded with stress-related illnesses, and I myself was feeling just insane amounts of what I would now call burnout. I had never heard of that word before, but burnout at home, burnout at work. Like I had little kids. It just never seemed like I had a moment to breathe. And you can only do that for so long. And so I would sort of turn to all the people around me who were amazing people. They were all physicians, they were all my friends, and everybody else was burned out too. And I think at some point, I really just had to recognize that this is a limitation right now. This is very limited. This is very contained. It's very powerful, but it's limited. And it was when I started to step out of that. And the only way I knew how to step out of it was 15, 16 years ago before like social media and I knew anybody else in town was I signed up to be a meditation teacher and an Ayurveda teacher. And I did that because I needed the accountability and I really wanted the in-depth part of it. I would never have thought that I would actually be teaching it. Truly, I needed the community and the accountability. And that's really how I think my journey got started. It's been one of reconnecting back to it and remembering, but there have been vast numbers of years in my life where I completely lost touch with it. And I kind of think of myself as just sort of like floating around totally rudderless during those years. It's not that they were wasted. Of course, we all have to go through our own journey, but there's been nothing linear about how I feel with turning inward into the energetic practices.
I like how you frame that. It seems that many of us have been on that journey where we start understanding that this is more than just putting knowledge to something and doing it. This is more about embodying that whole piece of inner self-care, uh, inner focus, because we can't just be running our lives like robots all day, right? We're human, we're not machines.
Yeah.
And so I love to hear about that trauma informed piece. It's a phrase everybody uses. And I just want to know about how you define trauma informed in your healing and in your process.
Yeah, what a great question. And you're right. I mean, just like meditation ends up getting all these different connotations, mindfulness, trauma informed also gets some of those things too. So, really, I did not understand what trauma was, I would say, until probably I began to train within. It's a trauma informed yoga therapy program. And I've kind of worked in that program for about 3 years or so as a student, and then also then been practicing it outside of it. And really, the idea, and I guess maybe I can tell a story that would maybe illustrate how little I really understood. And so this was, my kids were still living at home. They're in college now. And there was like the first 2 weeks or something like that. And this was an in-person program. And I said, oh, I'm so glad that I'm doing some of this so my kids can be spared of all this trauma. And my teacher was like, what? What? You know that like there's no one that's spared of trauma. And I was like, oh God, what do you mean? And so, I mean, that's really how I started to understand that it is a pretty universal experience. Sometimes we call it trauma with a big T, trauma with a little t. And the way that my understanding of it isn't necessarily the circumstance itself, but what happens to us as a result of what happened during a circumstance. And generally, when I am dealing with it with my clients or when I'm hosting a retreat, we tend to have a softer focus on our younger parts, on our younger selves, those parts of us that had to be exiled because, at 3, 4, 5, 6, even 10, 11 years old, we really don't have any resources. And so we end up making meaning and stories about ourselves when there are either something good doesn't happen that should happen, doesn't happen. We make a story about that with ourselves and it gets stored in the body, or something that is too big that we cannot deal with it in that moment. We end up storing that in our bodies, right? Or it simply we have no resources and it goes on for such a long period of time. I mean, it can be any flavor of those. And my guess is all of us can come up with different stories. Certainly, if we've been through medical training, we've had prolonged expectations of us that would certainly qualify us for having dealt with or gone through trauma for sure. And so it isn't so much about what's wrong here, but what meaning has happened within the mind body system. Where is it stored? How is it stored? And how would it like to be seen and felt and heard, right? Because what we know is trauma is mitigated by connection. And so sometimes all that's necessary is a connection for healing to start to happen. And trauma is also not completely avoiding life either. I mean, there's so many ways in which we can interact with life that we have to then be cognizant of. This person might be dealing with a trauma that they may not even be aware of, and that's okay if and when it's ready to be seen or heard. We just have to hold space for it.
Wow, well said. I like that you're conveying this whole theme of trauma as a stored experience and as the inner stories that we repeatedly tell ourselves. Could you give an example or share an experience where that kind of trauma was released with maybe talking it out or expressing it or what your process is?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's a very body-based process. And so yoga therapy really talks about when trauma is stored in the body, it's called a granthi. And translated, it's literally a knot. And so if you think about prana, if you will, and within the yogic system, prana energy is what connects us through to divine. It knows its way home, and it also flows very freely on its own until there is a blockage. And so our innate state is for prana to flow and have us connected to our higher selves. And so the way in which we deal with it is we actually remove the story from what's happening in the body. If it's a new client, we will never start with the biggest thing. So let's kind of start to see what's bubbling up and what is bothering you. So maybe it was a promotion they didn't get at work or whatever, right? It can be that they start to work with, because the truth is there's something else even underneath that started somewhere else, and we don't have to go down to the bottom to start with the superficial or whatever we call superficial. So we start with that. We really focus for a good long period of time until they can identify where it is in the body, and it's in all different places in the body. I have no idea. And once they identify it, we actually ask that the story be released because that just then brings in the mind. So much of this is quieting the mind. So much of this is moving past the mind and into the energy body. And so some of it can be movement. So the kind of yoga therapy that's trauma informed, there are times I might either ask them to move, like if it's in the hip, we might ask them to move in different ways, in different postures, and then hold it for long periods of time. Because the idea is prana actually gets released not when we try to bulldoze through it and not when we try to avoid it, but when we can touch the edge of it. If this is a knot, we get right to the edge and then we stay at the edge and we relax there and we breathe there. We allow it there and then we welcome it, whatever it is. And without forcing it, it will leave. And it is such a huge release, right? So a release can look and feel like anything. Sometimes it is tears. That's most often the case, right? And we don't have to have a story about the tears. Sometimes it's laughter. Sometimes it's like really, really deep laughter. Sometimes it's just like a, I don't know, whatever it is, I just feel lighter. And then there's always a meditative part at the end in order to integrate that. And so there are a lot of parts of yoga nidra that are also integrated within that system as well. And so we really just we start with the story, we go into the body, we leave the story, we work with the body. So that most of these things, Stacy, are pre-verbal. They are beyond words.
That sounds so amazing. And what kind of after effects or what can one expect to feel or what can one expect to experience rather after such a process is done? Um,
Well, it's not a one and done, as you can imagine, right? Most of us, if we've been holding on to something for 30, 40, 50 years, one hour session can get us closer to it, but it doesn't necessarily mean we're totally finished. And so oftentimes people will just start to have a shift in perspective. It is also for sure integrated in with coaching as well. Right. And so we do talk about what it is that is arising and how can we look at it from a different perspective. And I mean, coaching is coaching. And so over a 3 or 4 month period, if somebody kind of comes in and it's a whole mind body system, we cannot outsource that. And so some of it is just someone feeling comfortable enough and safe enough to turn inward, to be able to journal about something that they've had a lot of trouble journaling about. And that doesn't always have to be the case. There's a saying about how when we heal the present, we heal the past. And so we often work with that. We don't necessarily feel like we have to go back in the past to heal the past.
so nice. I want to ask a little bit about how your yoga education interfaces with the work of consciousness that you do and how that actually helps to, like you said, it helps us to release old programs that don't belong to us anymore, that we don't function with them anymore, and how we can adopt more functional belief systems.
Yeah, that's right. And Stacey, the work that you do, and then I think the work that I do, we're just using different systems to get to the same place. I've done some work with you in person, and it was really deep meditative, it felt to me, right? And so yoga is an entire system of living uh, a vibrant life, if you will. And so there are 8 limbs to yoga. And often in the West, we take just one of those 8 limbs, which is the asanas or the poses, and we blow it up, which is fantastic. I think everyone should be practicing yoga. But yoga isn't just the postures, it's not just stretching, it's a mind body spiritual practice. And there are yamas and niyamas. So, like, literally ways in which we can live that deal with generosity and being grounded and kindness to others and causing no harm. And there are all these different ways in which yoga talks about this. And the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which are thought to have been written somewhere between 2,500 to 3,000 years ago, the first thing that begins is, and now the teaching of yoga begins. And so, and sutras mean thread. And so it's like, it's very, very short, but you can talk for an entire week on one sutra, for example. Because what's happened is we've spent enough of our lives looking outside of ourselves for the answers, and we have not found the answers. So it's an invitation for when you're ready to turn inwards, come. Yoga is here as a system for you. right? And then the second line of the Yoga Sutras is yoga is the progressive stillness of the mind. And so it's already saying, look, when you're done looking everywhere else, come in here. But if you think this is the thing that's supposed to fix you, we don't know about that, right? Like this is an invitation for you to get really curious about what's already here, what was already here. So a lot of the work that I say that I do is helping people remember who and what they are. And so within that system, how it interfaces with consciousness is yoga and Ayurveda are sister sciences. And Ayurveda, translated, is called the science of life. And it is an entirely consciousness-based healing system. It can actually become very complicated if we make it complicated, but it is a simple system that breaks down the five main elements of which we are all made up and how it interacts with our lives and how it interacts with prana. And so to make all of that come together, the way in which I see it is the minute we start to quiet the mind, prana already knows how to heal. And so we often say and remind ourselves, prana knows the way home. And so it's always trying to connect us to our source. And the truth is, we're already connected, except for if there are those granthis or those knots that are keeping us from being connected. So the only thing that we get to do is allow those knots to be freed so that energy can flow more freely. And there's so many different ways we can do that.
I'm glad you brought this up because I think the prevailing uh, idea is that yoga is more of a workout or a meditative kind of practice. And I think you just open the doors up for many people to understand that it's more like a lifestyle, it's more like a way of being, a way of living. And I'm curious to know a little bit more about how you can make that a part of your daily life or how you make it a part of your practice.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So I do practice meditation every day and I do practice asanas every day for sure. I also practice breath work, which is one of the eight limbs, and you can, practice it for 5 minutes, whatever it is that makes sense for you. So I do definitely practice those for sure. And I would say the way in which I think it's integrated into my life is these ways in which we're constantly pushing past our own internal belief systems and our own. I don't think we're ever done growing. And I'm 51. I have young adult kids who are really pushing past their comfort levels and things like that. They're staying in their discomfort levels. And so I'd like to continue to model that, like push past, like it's okay if you get a no, like rejection's okay. Like that means you're at your growth edge. And so I am constantly pushing my own edges, which sometimes I wish I didn't because I'd like to just be comfortable for some time, but that's a negotiation for a later time. So, so the way in which the most practical thing that comes to mind is yoga often talks about really we only have control over our own systems, right? And that's true, but there's a large portion of us that believes we have control over our environment, we have control over other people. It's just if we just said this one thing, if we did this one thing, it'd all be different. And it's not that it's not true, but we have no control over anything outside of ourselves. And so it's a good reminder for me that I get to have a vision for the result. I get to paint a vision of the result for myself, and I get to go for it. I get to have control over all of my own behaviors and my own thoughts. I take full radical responsibility over them. And this is the key, is I do not become attached to that outcome that I just wanted to have. And that is yoga. That is the practice of yoga for me, right? When I can release the attachment to the outcome, because if I am honest about it, it's the attachment to the outcome that's causing the suffering, not the actual thing that's happening itself. It helps me to continue to keep growing.
That is such a big learning lesson for everybody. In fact, that was like one of the biggest learning lessons for myself. And it's one I'm still learning and still trying to
Same.
integrate. And
Yeah.
and like I said, we do very similar work, but from
Yeah.
very different
Yeah.
angles. And
Yeah.
so I love this conversation because part of my work has to do with human design, which is
Yes.
based on the
Yes.
the seven energy centers, the seven chakras
Yeah.
in traditional yoga or in
Hmm.
traditional Hinduism.
Yeah.
And today, human design is nine energy centers based on those seven energy centers. And so there's a lot of body awareness happening. And
Hmm.
then what we do with that body awareness is we figure out, hey, am I blocked in this regard? Is it keeping me from living my best life? And a lot of those things that we hold on to, they're just egoic kind of attachments that for one reason or another, we have maybe unmet needs that we haven't really given to ourselves or recognized.
Right.
And those things keep us from actually feeling that thing that we want to feel, experiencing that thing we want to experience. So I want to ask you a little bit more about when you do coaching,
I do.
how do you use these principles? Let's say if somebody was coming to you and said, I can't make more money, or I just can't make that next career step. Um, Maybe they're dealing with self-worth issues. How do you take that next step with them?
Oh, such a good question. So first you got to meet them where they are, right? And so sometimes they've done so much energy work, they've done so much work within, like they understand the chakra system. We just go right into like different poses. We just go right into some of those things, right? And sometimes they have such strong protector parts that they're unwilling to work within the body. So you have to stay with them for as long as you can. And I think that's the beautiful part is we don't need to abandon our intellect or even the ego, actually. We just get to use that fuel as a way in which we can connect genuinely and authentically. And when someone is ready to go on a deeper level, is the only time that we can go on a deeper level. And for example, I just got a new client came to me, but they had been doing a lot of work within this meditative system, yoga system for a long period of time. And they were a good friend of another client of mine. And so when they scheduled a discovery call and then they were ready, like right then and there to get started, I mean, we just went to like really deep levels, but that is the exception to the rule. Most people are functioning very much so at the analytical level, at the logical level, at the very left brain level. So we have got to meet them there. And then when they're ready, then we can say, hey, there's all this other stuff. And so it's a lot about meeting people where they are, I think.
Wow, wow. I read in your bio and your information that you also do work with voice activation. Is this correct? And
I
how that
do.
regulates the body. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah. So this started maybe just about a year or two ago. And a lot of it actually comes from improv. A lot of it comes from musical improv. And then some of it also just comes from a friend of mine who happened to be at a retreat who I hooked up with and said, hey, can you can you teach me this? Can you coach me on this for a long period of time? And a lot of it is just within the Vishuddha chakra and being able to express ourselves freely. And so within retreats, we will sing, we will dance, we will scream, we will really just start to activate the voice. There's a particular exercise in our retreats that we do, which most people think they're going to hate, but then they love it. And it's just this progressive, louder no of like just sort of, having these certain boundaries that feel so powerful for us, not in a way to harm anyone else at all, ever, but in a way that we've never been able to express. Like, just look at somebody and truly just say no. Like I still have a hard time with that. And so we practice all of those things. And some of it is also just chanting as well. There's a lot of chanting that we do within our in-person retreats as well. So it's, again, this is just working with energy. May I say, this feels like it's a digression, but what's occurring to me, because this is a nuanced thing and I didn't really understand it for many, many years until I started doing trauma-informed yoga therapy, was it was like a 2-year program, Stacy, and the vast majority of it dealt with the first 3 chakras. And I'm like, what are y'all talking about? I had bulldozed over those years ago, because I learned Ayurveda like 16, 17 years ago, and the chakra system and the practices. And I was so hyper focused on, the crown chakra and maybe the Agnya chakra. Like, it was just a very hyper focused thing for many years. But because I said, well, look, I have enough food. I live in a safe place. I have a safe family. And so, like, obviously, all my needs are met. I don't have to worry about safety. But that wasn't it at all because it was so much about internal safety that I had blown over. And so the vast majority of the work that we do in trauma-informed yoga therapy is those first 3 chakras, which are our basic human needs that, like you mentioned, we either don't give ourselves or don't give ourselves permission to, or don't connect with it when it's available, any one of those combinations, because what yoga says, and I have seen this to be true, is once we can move past those first three chakras within the heart chakra itself, it said that those lower energies, which are really just about survival energies, they become that thriving kind of energy. It becomes transmuted within the heart chakra, and you don't have to do a whole lot. There's very few things that we have to do. And so the voice activation we only do after we've worked with the first three chakras, if you will.
That's really fascinating because I think about when I did my work with human design, I was taught that that throat center, the throat chakra, is one of the most important areas that modulates energy within the body. It's the place where we activate other people, and it's the place where we have authentic self-expression. And so, as you can imagine, all those energies that have or coursing through our body, they need somewhere to go. And a lot of times it has to come out through self-expression. And I like what you said about how the body still has to feel safe enough to allow itself to self-express. So there's a lot of overlap here. I love this.
Yeah, there really is. Yes.
Wow. Okay. So, and there's just so many different questions I want to ask you about. But, since it's interesting because we're in a unique position to see both the language of science and then also the ancient wisdoms that have been passed down. I just wanted to know what your opinion was. Where do you see these two worlds converging right now? Where's it going?
Oh, that's a good question. You mean science and spirituality? Like, where is
Yes.
it going? I think they totally belong together, and I think they complement each other in many ways. And oftentimes, I had a mentor say to me many years ago, when I was really hung up on evidence-based stuff, like I was super hung up on it, and we have so much evidence now for so many of these things. But she had said, I don't know what more evidence you possibly need other than looking back to like 5,000 years ago. And it was such a sacred practice that this particular lineage of meditation was protected and handed down from teacher to student, teacher to student, teacher to student for thousands of years. And so some of it is us understanding that science takes time to catch up with some of the things that ancient wisdom already knew. We've been practicing some of these things within Ayurveda and yoga for thousands of years, so it's going to take a little bit of time. And it's also, I think, important to recognize that, at least in some part, science is driven by capitalism and money, and it's not a bad thing. But there's very little money in understanding that you can actually do inner work and thrive in the world. And so Big Pharma isn't really trying to fund a lot of studies that are going to connect with what we already understand. So it's some of it is just staying really curious and open that science is catching up with. And when there is science, is really like rejoicing in it and being able to communicate it very clearly. Because for me, when I look back, all of my teachers, including all of my teachers now, all have either an MD or a PhD, and I really, really, really deeply admire that kind of interplay, because I think you and I do the same thing because we are able to traverse both with ease and with comfort. And not to say one is better than the other, but to be able to incorporate those two. And, with your question is how will they interact with each other? I think they're already interacting with each other. But what occurred to me was, so my younger daughter's 19, and she's really deeply into quantum physics. She's a nuclear engineer, and a lot of yoga, or the discipline of yoga, when you break it all the way down, basically comes into quantum physics and the quantum field. And I think quantum physics and that whole thing is where if there's a Venn diagram, that's where they're interacting. And we're just starting to really discover some of it. And I think it's extremely exciting as to what we're kind of starting to learn within quantum physics.
I love this. And I love this conversation because that's a lot of my belief as well. I've never been trained in yoga or any of the practices that you've mentioned, but I think, like you said, these things are just converging. And the words we use for quantum field, energy, the divine potential, like consciousness, these are all basically almost the same thing. We're just slight nuances, right?
That's right. That's
And
right.
I think this is such a wonderful and exciting time to be alive. So I wanted to give you just a little space here so that maybe we can take our listeners through a process to help us get in touch with our bodies or with our breath. So I'll open the platform to you right now.
You bet. Yeah. So you'd like to do a practice. I think one very effortless practice. Let's do a meditation practice and let me describe the way that I think of meditation and mindfulness. So mindfulness I think of as the awareness that arises when we're paying attention to this present moment without judgment and with curiosity. It's basically what you and I've been doing for the last, whatever, 40 minutes. And it's also very difficult to do because the monkey mind wants to jump all over the place. And we know the scientific and spiritual benefits of a mindfulness practice are incredible because there is a natural connection back into our own source without necessarily a lot of intervention. Meditation, and there's so many different, very valid types of meditation. Meditation is simply the formal practice of mindfulness, and meditation is moving from activity into stillness. It's not creating stillness, it's not creating silence, it's actually just reconnecting back into our true source. And so we can do a really easy practice and allow prana to flow through really easily. How about that? Because most people have been running around. Why don't we just do a really soft seated practice and we can kind of see how this can be effortless. And so I think that's the biggest thing is like allowing it to be effortless. So let's do that. And so, to whoever's watching or listening, go ahead and just get into a comfortable position. And in a yoga nidra practice, for example, that is lying down. And sometimes people aren't ready quite yet to do that. And so, let's just do a seated practice and we'll do a mantra practice today. So, mantra just means mind vehicle or mind ladder. So, we just give the mind something to do while prana kind of slips right past the mind. And so, once you're comfortable, and I generally recommend if you would like to have back support, go for it. And then if your legs are crossed, go ahead and uncross them. And in general, and I think Stacy, your listeners know this too, but generally if we're ready to receive something from the universe, it's kind of nice to have our palms up and open. And if we're feeling kind of chaotic and untethered, then if we'd like to be a little bit more grounded, which is also incredibly useful, then just to have the palms down and and then just allowing yourself to very gently close your eyes. It's fine. It's perfectly fine if that doesn't feel safe for you. Just see if you can have a soft downward gaze. And we do that simply to take away the information that your mind body system has to deal with as far as vision is concerned. And so once you've either closed your eyes or you have a soft downward gaze, let's take a couple of deep breaths together. And as we exhale, let's create a loud sigh. So deep breath in, let it out with a sigh. Breath in. One more time. Loud sigh. And from this place, just noticing if the mind is offering a story, perhaps you have other things to do, somewhere else to be, and just noticing that and just giving yourself permission if you're able to just be right here, right now for this short practice. You can always get back to all the things. See if you can give yourself permission. And then notice if there's any tension in the jaw. We often hold tension there. Can you relax the jaw just a bit? Can you release the tiny muscles around the eyes? Just getting curious. Is it possible to drop the shoulders away from the ears just for a moment? Just settling in. And then just noticing the breath, not trying to control or alter it in any way. Simply noticing the breath. Allowing it to be effortless. And from this place, I'd like for you to silently repeat what I ask you to repeat. So the statement is, I am, and then I'd like for you to silently repeat to yourself your first name and your last name. So I would say, I am Rashmi Schramm, just silently repeating that. And now dropping the last name and silently repeating to yourself, I am, and just your first name. I am Rashmi, for example. Just silently repeating it to yourself. And now dropping the name all together and just silently repeating, I am, I am. And now let's switch to the Sanskrit vibration for I am, which is so, hum. So very effortlessly repeating the words so, hum, silently, effortlessly. So on the inhale, hum on the exhale. So, hum. Just go at your own pace. Be soft and easy. And if you find that your mind has wandered, you've done nothing wrong, just return back to so, hum, and I'll mind the time. Now, still keeping your eyes closed, gently release the mantra and just rest here. And as you rest, notice if you're able to put all your attention in between your eyebrows at the level of the third eye. Just noticing you're able, just the breath coming in through the third eye into the level of the heart and exhaling back through the third eye, softly and gently. Just resting and being, resting and knowing, resting in Sat, Chit, Ananda, love, knowingness, and bliss. And from here, just placing your attention back at the level of your heart and bringing in a deep sense of gratitude. Allow it to wash over your entire body. Gratitude for the many blessings in our lives. And if you can, take a couple of deeper breaths and place the palms of your hands at the level of your heart, just grounding yourself. And from here, silently repeat these 4 intentions for living a vibrant, healthy life. Just drop them as seeds into your being. Repeat after me silently. Joyful, energetic, healthy body. Loving, compassionate, open heart. Creative, abundant mind. Creative, abundant mind. And lightness of being. Lightness of being. Allowing those intentions to be dropped lightly into your being as you move through your busy days. And now beginning to take a couple of deeper breaths. Still keeping the eyes closed if it feels okay, bringing the palms together in what we sometimes call prayer position or Anjali Mudra, and just bowing head to heart, bowing to our highest selves, bowing with gratitude for creating the space in our lives for this busy practice. And then just when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes.
Wow, thank you so much for that. That was so relaxing. I felt myself go inside. I felt myself connect to that bigger essence that we are, that I am.
Yes,
And that was just so powerful. So
it's
thank you.
it's just it's so simple and it's one of my favorites.
Absolutely. So Rashmi, our time is almost coming to a close. So I just wanted to thank you so much for coming. And I just wanted to ask you if you wanted to let the listeners know just maybe one thing, what would that be?
Mm. Oh, only one thing. Only one thing. Happiness is an inside job.
Well said. I love that. And where can the listeners connect with you and see your work? I think there's going to be a lot of interest in what you have to offer. So,
Yeah.
could you share that?
Oh, absolutely. My website is just rashmishram.com. You can pop in there and get on the newsletter. And so anything that's coming up, you'll be the first to know about that. I have a podcast called Inner Peace and Power. I'd love to connect there as well. And then I'm on all the socials with just my name, DR, so doctor, and then Rashmi Schramm. So let's connect.
Awesome. Thank you again, Dr. Rashmi, for joining me today. And thank you again, listeners, for joining me today again on Stacy's Infinity podcast. So until next time, trust yourself and honor your inner wisdom. The information in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not intended to be used as a substitute for legal, financial, or professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Listening to this podcast does not create a physician-patient relationship with Stacy Cisneros, Anastasia Cisneros Frausto, MD, or any guest on the podcast. Always seek the advice of your personal physician or qualified healthcare professional with any questions regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast.